Welcome to the Darkstream. Vox Day, voxday.blogspot.com. And as we will see on Monday, the author of Jordanetics, A Journey into the Mind of Humanity's Greatest Thinker. So it's Friday evening. Everything is in that sort of mellow state of the book being finished, but not yet being out. And it's kind of a strange sort of lassitude that you feel because everything's done. There's nothing more to do. There's nothing you can do. And so you're just kicking back and waiting for the inevitable criticism and outrage and mocking. And I mean, obviously, if you're fortunate, there's an amount of praise and support. And if you're really lucky, the book does well. But it's kind of hard to explain, especially when you've written as many books as I have, because it's such a big deal. It's such a big thing when you first publish that first book, right? But once you've done it 5 or 6 times and you've learned not to get too excited about the idea that, it's going to be a bestseller. Well, no, it probably isn't. If you're fortunate, maybe it'll be a category bestseller. Maybe it'll linger in the top 5,000 on Amazon for a week or two. But, eventually it fades, and, sooner or later it happens to every book. SJW's Always Lie did really well for like 18 months, which was incredible. Guerrilla Mindset, Mike Cernovich's Guerrilla Mindset, even longer. But eventually, people move on and are interested in other things, and that's why it's important not to get too carried away. I've seen a number of authors, better authors than me, more talented writers than me, lose their ability to write, lose their desire to write, simply because they didn't meet the kind of success that they reasonably expected. I think it's very difficult for a lot of people when they, especially those who have a big success with their first book. I think it's tremendously difficult to accept the fact that their second book is not going to do anywhere nearly as well. It's very, very rare to have a big hit. It is even more rare to successfully follow that up with anything that is better than an order of magnitude less. And it's true. Ransom is clearly a reader of N.N. Taleb, publishing in extremistan. That's what it is. That's how it is. And that's always why I advise the writer or the would-be writer not to look at it as a job, not to look at it as a career. You may or may not have noticed, but I never, ever describe myself as a writer. I never describe myself as an author. There are people that we know socially who don't even know that I've ever written a book. It's not something I talk about. And it's not just because I don't really want to get into the politics and controversies and whatnot. I don't talk about the fiction either, for the most part. There's a few people that I will occasionally talk about these things with, people who are pretty hardcore readers and that sort of thing. But it's kind of funny considering how arrogant people believe me to be and how arrogant I genuinely am, it truly never occurs to me that the people that I know, socially, friends, family, have any, uh, I don't push my books on them. I don't encourage them to read them. I don't give them books. I just as soon leave that out of the social relations. And so, um, like I said, I just finished a book. We had to deliver it to Amazon at the end of the pre-order period. There's a 3-day period where you can't change anything, and so you have to sort of hit that. Once the book actually comes out, once it launches, then you can, upload new versions, fix whatever typos people find, and that sort of thing. But there's this strange period if you do a pre-order where you're done, and it's a severely compressed version of the 12 to 18 months it used to take in the traditional publishing world when you'd send off the book. It was always kind of funny because the book would come out, and it would come out so much later than when you'd finished it that a lot of times you couldn't remember the stuff that people would ask you about, especially if you were engaged in writing something else. A couple questions here. If Christianity is so important to the West, why don't you talk about theology more? Well, there's several reasons. Number one, I'm not a theologian. I'm not an expert in Christian theology. Now, I might know it a lot better than, say, Jordan Peterson, who didn't even bother reading the Bible before he started delivering a series of lectures on it. But, I don't have a sufficiently comprehensive grasp of all the theology dating back to the early Christian fathers that I believe you have to have in order to really have a significant opinion to discuss the topic. I've read Tertullian, I've read an amount of Augustine, I've read a reasonable amount of Thomas Aquinas, I've read several books by Greg Boyd. But that's very, very far from being any sort of expert on it. And so I don't feel that my opinion is sufficiently well-founded to be discussing it with others. Obviously, when I belong to a Bible study or something, we talk about these things, but that's very different than sharing my opinion in public. Also, theology is too deep for the average individual who is still trying to recognize or appreciate the fact that Christianity is integral to the survival of Western civilization. If you can't grasp that, then there's absolutely no point in delving into specific matters such as the merits of infant baptism in the Lutheran and Catholic style versus adult baptism in the Baptist sense. So, I think that it's much more important to focus on the significant core aspects of Christianity, which is first and foremost understanding and recognizing that the world is fallen, that evil exists, that Jesus Christ came and died and rose again to ransom us from that evil. If you don't nail that part of it down, none of the rest of it matters. Somebody says, you strike me as a C.S. Lewis guy. Very much so. I'm a huge fan of C.S. Lewis, of Mere Christianity. Um, I really regret that I wasn't around to take part in the debates that he had with the philosophers at that time, because, frankly, while I really appreciated C.S. Lewis's thoughts and his writing, unfortunately, he just was not the analytical debater that I am. And, I think that he could have done significantly better against some of those philosophical skeptics whose arguments were not terribly strong and easily turned back upon themselves. But C.S. Lewis wasn't that type of thinker. So, you seem to imply, hey, we got the gammas, that there will always be one group who dominates. Well, in a global system, there will be. I mean, you understand that one of the consequences of globalization is the centralization of power. And so the nature of communication, the nature of transportation, and the technology improvements are that power is there for the taking. And so, that's something that we can't really get around. And that's something that the evil powers of the world are all attempting to position themselves for. And that's something you always need to keep in mind, is that there isn't this monolithic human evil. There's a monolithic spiritual evil, but even there, there's not uniformity of purpose. And so, to me, that's always been the single most obvious flaw of globalism and global government, which is you've set up a system where you have just about guaranteed that the winner is going to be the most evil, most sociopathic party involved. If you look at what happens in those situations, it's a pretty reliable heuristic. I was laughing because Sebastian said, "You seem to imply that seeming like a gamma seems to imply one is a gamma." Yeah, there's just certain verbal tells that are pretty reliable. And what makes me laugh, it's not, you have to understand, it's not just use of the word seem. It's the way that they are setting you up for condemnation based on something that you have not specifically said or even necessarily implied. Okay? An honest interlocutor is going to ask you a question. Do you mean X? But see, that doesn't work for the gamma, because when you're asking a question, you are the supplicant. You are in the inferior position of the student asking the teacher whatever. The gamma has to maintain a superior position. And so what they're doing with that language is that they are attempting to assume the position of the prosecutor or the interrogator, who is superior to the person of whom he's asking questions. And so, I have learned, now obviously you're not necessarily a gamma if you just happen to ask a question that way for one reason or another. These are indicators. They're not conclusive mathematical proofs. But when you've seen these things as often as I have, you learn to recognize them pretty quickly. Larson keeps going on about leadership. Look, you just if you keep bringing up the same thing and I'm ignoring it, it's because I'm not really that interested. Can you admit that you are a leader who doesn't desire to lead? It totally depends on the context. I have been a patrol leader in the Boy Scouts. All right. I am the leader of the Evil Legion of Evil. I am, the editor of Castalia House. So I have certain leadership responsibilities. I do have certain leadership qualities, but I lack leadership ambition, and I also lack objectives that would involve leadership towards them. I made a decision a long time ago that I didn't want to pursue a career as a media whore. I'm not saying that it was not mildly tempting at the time, but I was not willing to make the sacrifices, nor did I think that the rewards they were offering did it for me. I like CB's comment. Your tone really isn't doing it for me. You seem to be implying that we're not understanding you correctly, but I really think that's condescending. Sincerely, a concerned viewer. Yeah, it's always amusing to me how these people come in and say, you're wrong, you're hypocritical, you're this, you're that. It's like, fine, then don't listen to me. YouTube clearly does not want you to listen to me, so don't. That's fine with me. I would much rather have, we've got apparently 244 viewers on YouTube. I don't know how many on stream.me. That's fine. That's great. That's about 200 more than I ever would have expected. And so, I just don't think that it's not the value. The value of the message is not determined by the number of people who are paying attention to it. Okay? There is literally nothing that Kim Kardashian or Kanye West or any of these celebrities with massive followings have to say. And so, but a lot of people listen to them. So, if that's your metric, good luck. I'm much more concerned with just being able to express and articulate my observations and opinions, and hopefully somebody will get something out of it somewhere, in the way that I have gotten various things out of books and thinkers and philosophers of the past. I'm just trying to pass it on. That's all. So let's get to what I wanted to talk about with regards to capitalism here. Something that I said the other night, I think is more important than I had initially thought. It was something that it was in answer to a question that Alex Jones had when he said, "What should we do? What should we do? What's the one thing we should do on the right?" Okay. And what I realized that we need to do is we need to fundamentally question our assumptions and ideals. Because part of what has gotten us here, part of what has gotten us into these very difficult situations and challenging circumstances is our ideals and assumptions. I'm talking about ours on the right. We cannot blame everything on the left. If you look at the people who do nothing but bitch about the left, that's That's what the Ben Shapiros do. That's what the Dennis Pragers do. That's what the William F. Buckley types did. They're constantly pointing their fingers at the Democrats, at the leftists, and they're never looking at their own assumptions. Now, we've begun to do that. Those of us who are on the nationalist right have begun to do that. We've begun to question things like free trade. We've begun to question things like legal immigration. Think about all the Republicans and the conservatives who have said for decades, the problem isn't the immigration, the problem is the illegal. Well, no. As we are learning, the problem is actually the legal immigration. Legal immigration is just another word for slow invasion, especially in a democracy. And so some of the stuff that we need to think about, this is exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about. This is, for lack of a better term, economic conservatism. It's not the idea, it's the application of the idea. Okay, anytime you catch yourself thinking in that formula, the problem is not the pure ideal, the problem is the application of the ideal. Okay, that's been used to try to rescue everything from communism to from communism to feminism to civil rights. Okay, I want to quote him here because it's important. Okay, this Patriot 95. He says, "Crony capitalism is what's wrong with capitalism. Capitalism, untouched and not corrupted, works well. It's what grew America early on." Well, no, that's not true. I mean, here's the problem with these false dichotomies. These false dichotomies lend themselves to that sort of misleading formula. Crony capitalism is a problem. But the fact that crony capitalism does not mean that capitalism is necessarily, intrinsically, and always good. And I was thinking about Murray Rothbard's history. He's got a very large 2-volume history of economics. It's from the Austrian perspective. It's very interesting. It's very, very well founded in economic history. But what I realized about it is that from the Rothbardian perspective, modern economics is simply the acceptance of debt. Everything that he writes about, I mean, it's kind of shocking when you think about it. He devotes an incredible amount of time in this very long book to address the question of usury. And speaking of theology, it's really remarkable how much space he devotes to Christian theology, because he's focused on how getting rid of the prohibitions on usury was necessary for economic development. And so, all right, got to get rid of the obsessive anti-Semites. Guys, it's not that difficult. This is not a place for you to try to hijack the mic. This is not a place for your monomanias. Stick to the subject we're talking about. If you're just going to try to, drop in these random comments, you're going to be hidden from the channel, and no one will ever see anything that you say on this channel again. So, you might want to make sure that one brief glimpse people might see is going to be worth it. So anyhow, I started thinking more and more about the conceptual problems of capitalism, because obviously the issue of debt is a massive problem. And I've demonstrated this, I've dealt with this before. The biggest single problem with debt is that it completely warps the supply-demand curves. And this is without even getting into Steve Keen's mathematical demonstration that there is no such thing as a collective supply-demand curve, that you cannot create a supply-demand curve from adding multiple supply-demand curves together. So we're still working on the concept of conventional economics, okay? We're still in the world of Adam Smith here. But once you add debt to the equation, then what you start seeing is people whose demand is lower than someone else's suddenly have the ability to outbid people who have a higher level of demand and a greater ability to pay. And so this turns into a absolutely demand warping process that completely eliminates the efficiencies of capitalism. And so, what we're seeing, we're not talking about crony capitalism here. We're not talking about the fact that there are favored parties and disfavored parties and that sort of thing. We're simply talking about the fact that you have the ability to spend resources you don't have to outbid people who have more resources than you today is intrinsically introducing a level of inefficiency and a level of market misinformation that did not exist before. And so the interesting thing is to think about let me back up for a second. One of the problems with communism was the fact that it destroyed the information that is provided to everyone by the market. It destroyed the pricing mechanism. But if you think about it, debt does exactly the same thing. It destroys the market information. And if you look at the situation that we're in now, where you have the elimination of contract law and you have the elimination of accountability and contracts and the basic ability to reliably buy and sell, you can be working with PayPal one day, and the very next day, even though you've met your obligations, you've paid what you're supposed to pay, and then suddenly it's gone. Well, how can you build a business based on that kind of unreliable payment foundation? You can't. I was actually talking to a European businesswoman today, and she's pretty successful. She's started businesses, sold them. She's what I would call a serial entrepreneur and a moderately successful one. And she was absolutely horrified to hear what has been happening with companies like PayPal and Stripe. She knew a little bit about YouTube banning people, and she knew a little bit about, Facebook banning people. But the fact that payment processors are starting to get into this. She said, this is, she said, I can't even believe this. This sounds like conspiracy theory. I mean, this will devastate the entire online economy eventually. I said, I know. You know, I mean, talk about undermining consumer confidence. If you look at basic economic theory, one of the most important aspects of it is that business leaders have the confidence to invest money into new factories, into new ideas, into new services. And what the payment processors are doing is destroying this. And so here's where it gets really theoretical and abstract. Because I was thinking, how is it possible that the global elites who are not only happy with this, but actually encouraging this kind of behavior, how does that make any sense at all? How does it make a modicum of sense for them to do this when it's going to be bad for all of them? I mean, these are not stupid people. Jeff Bezos is not a stupid person. He was worrying today about the decline and the bankruptcy of Amazon. I mean, as big as Amazon is, as huge as their market cap is, they don't actually make that much money. Their margins are very, very small. And they've reinvested, you know, they reinvest most of the money that they make. But what if it all falls apart? Boom, they're gone. And faster than you think. He was noting, it was actually interesting, he had some good observations to make. He said the average large company, and he's talking about really big companies, he said the average large company tends to fade away in about 30 years, not 100 years like a lot of people think. He said the only companies that seem to last that long are breweries. Why is that? Because if you're a brewer and you make beer, people like to drink beer. And if you can figure out a way to just keep making beer, people are going to keep buying it. And so, so when you look at, I always enjoy stupid people trying to make comments. The title of this is Rethinking Capitalism, but all I hear is some boring wandering off in the weeds. That's just because you're too dumb to understand this. Go away. Now, I'm not saying that you should trust Bezos or anything. I'm saying that these are intelligent people who are sufficiently far-seeing enough that they can understand that even their giant corporation might be gone in 30 years. And so, so how is it that he supports these things that are obviously not going to advance the economy, advance the society, advance the civilization, advance the world? Okay? And it occurred to me that the problem is they are bored. They reached that level of success where they're unable to achieve any satisfaction or any pleasure from their own success, from throwing themselves into hedonism. And so they literally don't care. They can't see that it's going to make any difference what they do. I mean, they are experienced what I would call, I don't know how to pronounce this correctly, but they're experiencing anomie. A-N-O-M-I-E, if that's the correct way to say it. And this is the connection that I think that I was failing to make between Christianity and the importance of Christianity to the establishment, advancement, and survival of Western civilization. And so if you look at the great businessmen of the Christian era, what did they do? They built churches. They built hospitals. They had that hope and that spirit of servitude that comes from the Christian tradition. And so what I think that we're seeing is the nihilism and the hopelessness and the simple lack of regard for the future that is common to the non-Christian soul. And that also explains why other cultures, whether you're talking about China, whether you're talking about Japan, whether you're talking about the Jewish nation, why all of them have been totally unable to make any significant advancements without Christianity, and why they're unable to even maintain Western civilization without it. And so, when you have this, I mean, I was outside watching some of my family work with the chickens. We have chickens, and it's a lot of work. And it occurred to me, we've lost a couple of them to foxes. Since then, we've fortified the coop. We lost, a friend of mine lost his chickens to a weasel. He's like on the warpath now. I don't think there's going to be a weasel left within a square mile of his house. And it occurred to me how much easier it is to be a predator or to be a parasite than to be a builder. And if you think about whether you're talking about, the barbarians who swarm down from the mountains or out of the desert and pillage the farmers, or whether you're talking about the merchants who, have this sort of half predatory, half parasitical relationship on the builders and so forth. And that's not saying that they don't provide a useful service. But once the economy, if you think about it, what is our economy fundamentally built on? It's not debt. If you think about it, what is our economy fundamentally built on? What do we, no, it's not built on labor. What do we spend all kinds of money on trying to convince people to do? Trust, no. Interest, no. People, no. Freedom, no. Trust, no. Freedom of choice is closer. Perpetual growth, no. No. What our entire economy is built on is sales and contracts. It is entirely built upon talking somebody into putting their... Okay, I'm going to get rid of this guy. He's annoying. Oops. Anyhow, it's all built on talking somebody into signing up for something. It's all about talking somebody into agreeing to something. Once you get that signature on the contract, you own them. And that's that's not, I mean, is it part of capitalism? The whole concept of exchange. Rational capitalism is based on the idea that all exchanges are to the benefit of the person exchanging. But we know that's not true. We know that's false. And so people try to get around it by saying, well, it's just the application that's false. Maybe one side doesn't truly understand. Maybe one side doesn't have a correct valuation and so forth. And so Candlelight says, is that different than trust? Yes, it's different than trust. It's about exchange. And so that may be the problem with capitalism, is the way that it is fundamentally based on exchange. But if you can't rely on exchange, if exchange allows for intrinsically predatory and parasitical relationships to the point that it reduces the ability to be productive, then you have a serious problem. And we're well past that problem in the United States. If you look at the way that exchange is influenced by persuasion, the way okay, look, some of you just need to not listen to this channel, okay? If you're going to say something as stupid as, so you want to be a communist, move to South Africa, let's see how you like, just go away, okay? You're not smart enough to be involved in this conversation. Either don't talk or go away. We're not talking about communism here. We are talking about, there's not a binary yin and yang of capitalism and communism. Okay? When you listen to me, understand implicitly that we are not dealing in binary matters. Okay? What we're talking about here is some of the implicit assumptions that we have to question if we're going to understand the situation that we're in. And so the assumption that I have not questioned, the assumption underlying capitalism that you have not questioned, and that most critics of capitalism have not questioned, is whether the concept of voluntary exchange is sound, is fundamentally sound. Because if it is not, then things are not going to turn out the way that any economist expects to. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this moron too. See, here's the thing. If you're going to say stupid shit, I will get rid of your messages on this channel and you will never be able to comment here again. So, if you have questions, ask questions. But at least try not to be retarded, okay? Let's see. So, Vox, you think most of the economic system is corrupt, that fundamentally the system... I'm not saying that I think that. What part of we are questioning our assumptions did you miss? I am a Austrian economist. Several of my books, one of my books in particular on economics, is actually used at several universities to teach economics courses. Okay? So I have, my assumptions are normal. My assumptions are conventional. I'm not as radical as Steve Keen. And so, see, now this is a reasonable question. So what's the alternative to voluntary exchange? Rape? Well, it would be a option. I very much doubt it would be a more effective or efficient option. I don't know. We're asking questions, not providing the answers. I mean, at this point, we're only beginning to try to look at the problem, and so we can't possibly know. I'm not even saying that my doubts about the assumption are correct. I'm simply attempting to better understand the entire structure. Joe says, just ignore the damn chat. Well, how can that would sort of defeat the whole purpose of doing this? I mean, if I'm just expressing my ideas, then I'll write a book. The whole purpose of the Darkstream is to allow for, okay, I'm probably sabotaging myself here because I can't take a certain level of moron. But, the whole idea of the Darkstreams and the Voxiversities is to reach out to the post-literary audience, the people that would rather watch or listen than read. Because that's most people now. You can only reach 10 to 15% of the population with books. And so, a lot of my supporters have said, hey, we want you to do this. Okay. So we're doing this. But I have a limited capacity for putting up with unintelligent people. Someone said, what's the book? The book is The Return of the Great Depression. You can safely ignore my conclusions. I thought things were going to get worse than they did. But I did provide the full range of scenarios, and obviously the muddling through, kicking the can scenario is the one that we're in. And we're still in a global depression. Don't be fooled. But it hasn't gotten as bad as I would have imagined. So, could these parasitical relationships exist without the system of debt that we have now? Yes, absolutely they can exist. No question. But the effect of it might be significantly reduced through various means, one of which might be the elimination or limitation of debt. I mean, right now, one of the problems that we have is that the financial sector eats up nearly 1/3 of all profits in the system. Okay, so when you talk about how important finance is, to lubricate the wheels of the system, the fact that allow things to work, well, it's not very efficient if it takes 1/3 of everything it produces just to make it run. That is indicative of a very, very serious problem. That's indicative of a problem that is going to break the system. And so, do you know of historically tried models that allowed for large-scale cooperative endeavors beyond the limit of personal trust, other than contracts or use of centralized force? Not offhand. Not offhand. Crave says, I'm enjoying your thoughts, but watching you torch idiots is also fun. I'm glad it's amusing somebody. Okay, this has got to be a joke. Taleb is clueless. You need to read Steven Pinker. That guy is so smart, and he says religion is dumb. Haha. I pray that you are being sarcastic. Is Vox venturing into the early Native American system of tribal truth? Exactly. We're all going back to wampum. It's the only solution. No, I mean, I'm just asking. I'm asking questions of my own assumptions. That's all I'm doing. I'm not telling you what you should be thinking here. I mean, you need to understand. There's times when I tell you, I think that I'm sure this is right, and there are other times when I'm at the exact opposite perspective, which is I'm just thinking out loud here, and that's all we're doing. Is economics taught at universities mostly BS? Yes, but you need to understand it if you want to make any sense of the various questions that are being asked and decisions that are being made today. How much of this predatory relationship is due to ethnic differences? I don't think that most of it is relevant. I mean, I think that obviously it makes it easier and it helps people justify it. But these relationships exist, everywhere. And the more predatory the culture, the more competition there is within it. I mean, it's really interesting. For example, I would love to. I've done some work with some Israeli groups, and until you do that, I mean, you're probably all aware that I do not buy Jordan Peterson's idiot argument that the reason for disproportionate Jewish success in the United States at the present period of time is because they're just so smart and hardworking. Okay. If that were true, then presumably they'd been held down for the previous 2,000 years. And for some reason, once they had their own nation, they somehow mysteriously lost that ability. Until you work with an Israeli organization, you can't understand how not perfect it is. I'm not saying it's bad. You should try working with an Italian firm. Good Lord. But there's absolutely no comparison between the efficiency of working with a German organization versus the chaos of working with an Israeli one. And we're not talking about, random unsuccessful groups and people. We're talking about, established, successful organizations. But the different nature of the way that they work is inescapable. And once you have a sufficient amount of experience working with, on the one hand, the Japanese and the Koreans, on the other hand, the Italians and, the English and the Germans and so forth. I mean, it fundamentally changes the way that you look at things. Most of the opinions being expressed by people like Jordan Peterson are being expressed in total ignorance. Vox, did you hear Peterson is going to the Trilateral Communion? Yeah, I have heard that he is at the 42nd annual meeting in Slovenia. So anyhow, let me a couple things. I'm going to wrap it up here. So first of all, don't forget. Oh, first of all, thanks to all of you who have pre-ordered Jordanetics, A Journey into the Mind of Humanity's Greatest Thinker. It's got a foreword by Milo Yiannopoulos that is, I would say, biting is probably a mild way to put it. But it's really good. and I hope the book is equally good. And it's already the #1 new release in political philosophy. It comes out on Monday, and if you have any interest at all in Jordan Peterson, I would highly recommend that you pre-order it. I have to get around my microphone here. And then also, this is also the new cover of Alt Hero #5, and this is Alt Hero #5, London Calling. And so we're going to introduce a few new characters. We're going to bring the story back to the USA. This should probably be out week after next. And so a lot of respect to the artist, Richard Bonk. He did this despite suffering through a hurricane, losing his power for a month, and I think that you're going to like the story. If you're reading Alt Hero, you're going to enjoy this. This is also going to be Richard Bonk's swan song with Alt Hero for now, because he is moving over. He's already moved over to Swan Knight Saga, and he's doing phenomenal work on that. So, anyhow, thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you all the next time. And we'll continue thinking more thoughts on rethinking capitalism at some point in the future. Have a good evening.